I think we have a quorum. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to our monthly webinar series. We're super excited this time to have a very timely discussion around, supply chain tariffs and kind of the upcoming potential changes. But also, we wanted to give folks on the product development side a toolkit how to navigate and how to use supply chain as a strategic advantage. And we have two experts that are calling in. Jack Daniels, obviously the best name in the business, calling in from the Massachusetts area, president of Eastbridge. I've known Jack for, I don't know, 20 years probably. He's a real force of nature in the local, or actually probably in the US tech community, as a go-to person if you need to get anything sourced or developed, and has been doing this for a long time. And then Scott Gant, calling in from San Diego, California. He's Vice President of Business Development at FES International. FES is actually a really interesting OEM, ODM, JDM that is originated from China, but now has quite a larger footprint outside of China. And we're super excited to have Scott calling in. He's also an industrial designer, so obviously has a lot of the understanding of not only the technical aspects of supply chain and product development, but also the industrial design aspects of building products. And I'm Gregor, founder of Loft. As I said, we do monthly topics around important things that we see in product development, and kind of cater towards our clients, but also folks that are interested in generally kind of getting up to speed on certain topic areas. Saloni, if you show to the next one. We have actually next week an in-person event coming up at the Loft headquarters in Providence. You can still sign up there through our UX Talk series. It's next Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. And you can sign up. We are actually posting something right now after this webinar. It's about digital graffiti, and it's one of the UXers, local UXers, is having a talk. And then last but not least, before we get started, if you haven't been on our monthly newsletter, subscribe. You can go to loft.design and subscribe. And we won't spam your inbox. It's one newsletter a month with jam-packed with relevant information and information about upcoming webinars as well as in-person events. So let's get started. I want to have Jack first kind of talk a little bit about his background and also like how he got into the product development realm, and then do the same thing with Scott, and then we get started on the questions.
Okay. Thanks for the kind introduction, Gregor. I will say that it has been about 20 years since we've kind of been together. And I remember your first modest office in the repurposed mill in Woonsocket. So it's thrilling to see how well you've done and how Loft has grown. So congratulations to you folks.
Thank you. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of headaches, right? It used to be
Yeah.
easy.
Well, I remember that your neighbor in Woonsocket had an air compressor in the next office, so it got a little noisy in Loft from time to time. So,
Yeah,
but
those
anyway,
are humble beginnings.
yeah. Well, look where you are now. But again, thanks for the kind introduction. By way of a brief introduction of Eastbridge, I'm a chemical engineer by training. I've worked in the electrical interconnect, printed circuit board assembly, cable and wire harness, and advanced material segments for most of my career. And along the way, I had the opportunity to live and work overseas twice, first in the Republic of Korea, in South Korea, and later in China. And what I learned along the way is large multinationals, big companies had international procurement offices in the key manufacturing geographies around the world. So in Germany, in Tokyo, in Hong Kong, etc. And if you had an emerging design, you could hand it off to them and it would be caught by a team of manufacturing engineers, logistics specialists, quality engineers, industrial engineers who could kind of complete the engineering and transition it into the supply chain. And, 6 months later, that finished product would show up in your dock in Illinois. And what we realized is that was a luxury that a very small number of companies had. And the premise for Eastbridge was to be able to provide that level of service on an incremental or pay-as-you-go basis to the 90% of the companies in North America and Europe who didn't have that resource. So that's what we do for a living. Approximately half of our work is medical device and healthcare related. The other half is very broad. It's electronics, automotive, transportation, sensors, electronics, consumer. What kind of unifies our work is we're always taking an emerging design and then transitioning it and guiding it through the supply chain.
Excellent. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your kind words and introduction. Let's turn it over to Scott.
Yeah.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Likewise, thank you for hosting this and a very, very timely and exciting topic. So a little bit on my background. I'm went to school for industrial design, and then I took a detour with 6 years in the Marine Corps, and then came back into the field of design. And I've worked at consulting and corporate venues. And then after a pretty exciting career in corporate at Dell and HP, on to work with FES International. And along the way, I've had two startups. So I've also built a company, built products, and then sold those two companies. So I've kind of had a great exposure to many different needs and kind of the process that each one of those environments has to go through. A little bit about FES International, headquartered in Shanghai, and back in 2018, during the original punitive tariffs, we opened up a factory down in Thailand. And we support customers from startups all the way up to tier one OEMs such as Dell, Logitech, GoPro. It's really an exciting place for me to be because every day I get a call from a startup or an established company, and they're all working on very different things. So my creative energy gets fed by all the different products and things I have to learn from the companies that come to FES to help. We either build box build or we do turnkey solutions for them. But it really is an energizing environment to be in. So I'm having a lot of fun at this stage in my career. So FES has a global sub-tier supply chain, if you will. So we integrate components from Europe, US, all over Asia. We bring it into our factory if we don't make things custom, and then we integrate them, provide testing services, and retail ready packaging if that's what the customer requires. But every day I come to work, it's like a box of chocolates. There's always an issue. Supply chain is tricky. Hardware is hard, but it's exciting to work with all these different companies and then help solve this complex puzzle of getting a product made and to market.
Exciting. I think I'm glad you're bringing this up. So, every product we love and we use around our daily lives is probably 90% of parts that come from somewhere, right? If it's PCBA assembly or components on a PCBA or sub assemblies or enabling sensors or batteries or anything in a product comes from somewhere. And I think it's interesting that if you think of a factory building something, most likely they have a supply chain that goes into Germany, Japan, Korea, the US, anywhere, right? I have a question for you, Scott. How do you navigate this kind of massive, spreadsheet, now knowing that there might be certain components that actually have, punitive damage, punitive tariffs on them for future use? Is there like a strategic approach to that, or you do second sourcing, or how is that even handled for you guys?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, for anybody out there building a product, really understanding if you're bringing it into the EU or if you're bringing it into the US, understanding what the HS code is. What is that finished good or component that you're bringing in, and what is the tariff from the country of origin that you're bringing it in? One of the benefits of us building in Thailand right now is the rules are if it's 30% more value added in Thailand, it's made in Thailand. So all the components could come from wherever they come from originally, as long as they get transformed and manufactured, assembled into a product, that that product in its entirety is made in Thailand. And so we've helped customers go from a 25% tariff in China to a zero tariff coming from Thailand based on the transformation. Now, the plastics might still be coming from China or elsewhere, but because of the value add in Thailand is over the 30% threshold, we're able to bring it in as a made in Thailand product. So you really should consult with a import expert just to make sure that you're taking advantage of that. So each individual electronic component doesn't stay as its originating manufactured country of origin. So yeah, that's how we and that's been going on for years with Mexico and the US or Canada, where a washing machine or a vehicle could be going back and forth across the border multiple times before the finished good. And it's taking advantage of whatever rules are out there.
I'm glad you bring this up because I think that's exactly what happens, right? Many US-based products actually have a fair large component that is abroad. Like German car companies are notorious for bringing in full sub-assemblies into the US plants and then basically finishing them up here, just because they just don't have the supply chain set up here, or they don't have the precision machining platform set up here to even support like a gearbox or motor assembly. But with the rest of the unit being a larger percentage, obviously it becomes US made, right? So Jack, I have a question for you. Is that something that you also do when people come to you, like basically consult with them, or do you have experts that can help with that?
We have a number of colleagues on the team at Eastbridge who are international trade and logistics specialists. And to Scott's point, understanding the HTS, the harmonized tariff code, early in the process is very important, and that can help guide how you decide to manufacture the product. The other comment that Scott made about transforming or substantive transformation of your product, in his case, in FES's case, in Thailand, the standard by our government in the United States is substantive transformation. How that's measured, how that's calculated is a bit of an art. And you can kind of optimize your approach to doing that. But what I would say is you really need to document and have a bill of process that defines really what was transformed and where. Because there are a few notable cases where there was production of an electronic product in China, and then it was transferred to contract manufacturers in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Vietnam. And the Department of Commerce said, time out. You didn't really transform it. You did some final test and packaging, but you didn't build it in Vietnam. So you have to be very cautious with that. Um, I would say the other thing that's really critical for many companies is getting your supply chain team involved early in the process, sort of before you commit to a final design, because a lot of our work and a lot of the value we add is in localizing the BOM where the product will end up really being built and assembled. So what may be a very logical bill of materials in South China and the Pearl River Delta area may not work as fluidly if you're going to try to build the same product in Mexico, as an example. So you really need to identify the source of components and key materials and subassemblies and define, what can be changed and what can't be changed and where there's latitude to substitute local supplies. And I know you at Loft to pay attention to that a great deal and that localization of the BOM. So that's something we're strongly focused on.
Right. Yeah, I think it's fascinating, right? Many of our clients are reaching out right now because a lot of times they have legacy products they've built for years, right? And
Mhm.
a lot of these documentations are very spotty or non-existent because the vendor has been building these products for 5, 10 years, and sometimes a lot of times we actually get basically a project out of it because we have to almost scan the data, scan the end product, build the engineering files around it, and a lot of times what we do is also improve based on that, as Jack said, localize the BOM, look at like component level, what can be done with the OEM that actually we're targeting, partnering with them early, but then creating the engineering handoff files for that new vendor so they can actually kind of do their work, right? So it's a lot of kind of engineering effort to move a supply chain, not only moving the supply chain, but also kind of making sure that the product solutions are engineered so you have the right amount of yield and the right amount of technical complexity to be sure to hit a margin. So it's not only like avoiding the tariffs; it's also a lot of times improving on the product and improving with newer components. I mean, what's also fascinating, everybody here went through COVID. COVID was a massive shift because a lot of components got end of life. We had so many companies that actually had to re-engineer the entire product portfolios just because they couldn't get components anymore. So it's a similar effort, and moving a supply chain is also when something becomes obsolete. So I think, in a sense, having a partner like FES or like Eastbridge that is like really an expert in that field can really help you kind of be almost more nimble in strategically planning your supply chain goals.
Yeah. And to that point, and this is something we experience, it's also a question for Scott, but what we've noticed that in many geographies, you may find a CM who has the technical capabilities to build your product, but there isn't kind of an ecosystem of suppliers and subcontractors who are accessible to them. As an example, we do a lot in the wearable device space. So think, something like a Fitbit that you would wear on your wrist. In the Pearl River Delta area of China, of Southeast China, you have this entire network of companies that make the little bezels and the seals and the batteries and the tiny printed circuit boards and the wristbands and the buckles and so forth. And everything is within a 50-mile radius of the contract manufacturer. You know, Technically, it's, in theory, you could build that same product someplace else, but you have to kind of set up an entire supply chain to support that. And many times we get pressed into duty to do that, where we'll kind of build a kit of components and parts in one part of the world, and then we'll ship it to another part of the world to support that build.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up because you're right. I think the supply chains is really the most important part in getting to market fast, right? That can take a lot. Qualifying a sub vendor or a part supplier can take a lot of effort. I'd love to hear from FES, like, how do you guys do that? I mean, you're dealing with the same thing, right? You have to now like source plastics from Malaysia or from, other areas, but not from China. How do you get about that? Is that something you do ahead all the time, or is that something you focus on when you get the product built?
So just taking a step back, but then answering that question. So one of the things we recommend the customer to do is to look at the total cost of the product landed. Sounds obvious, but a lot of times as industrial designers or engineers, mechanical engineers, we focus in on the hard goods, the metals and plastics and whatnot. Um, Typically, consumer electronics, one of the most expensive parts, or if not the most expensive part of the total build is the PCBA and certain components that go on there. So we and then when the product is designed and developed in EU or in the US, a lot of times those engineers will just spot buy those components. So it's readily available. And then they'll build the electronic bomb. So one of the quickest ways we can localize the supply chain and reduce cost is review that electronic bomb and say, are you okay with swapping out these components? They're equal or better than what you spec. So that's an important step to take. And sometimes when people hear rumors about things not being as well produced overseas, people are resistant to that. But it's not smart to not localize your electronic bomb because those components will be less expensive and they will sometimes be better, but as hopefully as you scale up, you'll be able to purchase those components readily as you have success with the product. In terms of so anyway, to summarize that, take a look at the most expensive things, focus on those things, right? To uh, don't get sidetracked with trying to get a couple pennies out of a plastic part when you could take a couple dollars out of the PCBA. When we've transitioned customers from China to Thailand, um, what Jack said is exactly right. Oftentimes, there is not the ecosystem to support all the plastics and metals or specialty finishes in Thailand, but that 30% transformation, we are we have electronic PCBA capability in-house. So we can take all the components from China, Japan, Taiwan, wherever they come from, and we build the board in-house. 100% of the finished board is contributed to the cost of the bomb. So all of a sudden, you could go over that 30% threshold just from the PCBA. So we can still bring in plastics and metals, and then do the assembly in Thailand. So where possible, we try to source it as close to our factory as possible, but it those supply chains are lagging, like Jack said. But again, strategically, if you're building the PCBA in-house, you're adding to that 30% threshold. So that's how we're approaching it, and we've been successful with it.
Scott, and your plant in Thailand is sited in a bonded zone,
Correct.
which is essentially in common parlance a duty-free zone. So those components you bring in from Japan or Korea or China can enter your factory unburdened by duty and tariff, as long as you commit to shipping the finished good outside of Thailand.
Correct.
So that's a great advantage of being in a bonded zone. But kind of to turn that a little bit, that mechanism to do that doesn't work so fluidly everywhere around the world. So, as an example, in Mexico, unless you are a giant multinational, unless you are Ford or Carrier or Evinrude, the ability to kind of do business and bring goods in and out without levying tariffs and duties, it's really hard in Mexico. For your kind of, small and medium enterprises, that doesn't work very fluidly in Mexico or elsewhere. So you really need to pick your locale carefully.
Yeah,
That's a
good,
really
great
good
point.
insight.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, Jack, that's exactly what you're saying is like your component tariffs could sometimes even offset the punitive tariffs that you're paying coming out of China because of that, right? So you have to be really careful where you're building. And I think that's kind of the question I have for both of you. I know Scott, you guys are in Thailand, and um, what's the what's the strategic next location that everybody's looking at? where's where's the what's the hot
Where's
new
where's
frontier
the
of
where's the
manufacturing?
3D printed part in your garage?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
well, we took a lot of time to pick Thailand as our out of China location because you hear a lot of talk of India or Vietnam, and Um, I'd say each area has advantages and many have disadvantages. We selected Thailand because the government is very accommodating and welcoming to foreign industry. We can set up in a duty-free zone pretty without a lot of hassle. Some of the other regions are having infrastructure issues, rail or port limitations, road congestion, power. Some they don't have enough power to run the factories all the time, and so on and so forth. So we're pretty happy with having selected Thailand. We're also able to take advantage of all the low cost regions for what they are still better for. So there are stamping components and other things we go to Vietnam for. Um, so yeah, ease of doing business in the country that you pick is important, and they're not all equal. But we foresee operating out of Thailand and not looking elsewhere for a good decade if hopefully if everything goes as we planned.
Mhm.
We have an office in
So
Vietnam
when you
in Ho
were
Chi Minh City, and we're exploring
uh,
opening an office in Thailand. But we're also seeing opportunity in Latin America, where there's more and more activity in the Dominican Republic and in Costa Rica.
and is that mainly because of the med tech? I know that.
That's that in Latin America, correct. That's the big driver. Um, yeah, that's really what we're seeing there. But expanding our footprint in Southeast Asia makes sense for Eastbridge because we have three offices in China and we have a great depth of knowledge about doing business there. And a lot of the manufacturers, a lot of the companies who now have a presence in Southeast Asia are subsidiaries of Chinese companies. So being able to, relatively seamlessly take a program that's being manufactured outside of Shanghai and then transition it to a factory in Myanmar or Thailand, with essentially the same management team involved is really a benefit to us and to our clients.
That's a very good
Sounds
point.
you're
I'm
describing
describing
FES.
FES. I know. Yeah.
Back to the tariffs and the point I was making about do your homework. What's been interesting to me is for various customers of ours, we do irrigation timers, for example. You would think that they would get hit with a tariff, and they're not hit with the 25% tariff because they're in an agricultural space that had a carve out. Heart rate monitors have a carve out, and so a lot of people assume they're going to get it. They're going to be hit with the tariff in China, um, and it could be that the product that you are making is not affected. Now, that's not to say with the new administration, what will or will not be affected. But I think a key point is go back, do the homework, make sure you know what your product, what your import code is.
Scott, to that point, we we do a lot of work in high tech and hard tech, and but with that, we often get sort of what I would describe as ancillary business. So if there's a medical device, it probably might need a carrying case. So we do a lot that falls into the soft goods category. So cut and sew cases, moldy EVA cases, backpacks, things of that nature. And we're adept. We know that market. We've been in it a long time. And we're just modeling costs now to do it closer to home in Mexico, but also in the United States. And you have the opportunity to do that. And what we've seen again and again is you can't let the tariff wag the dog necessarily, because that that soft case that comes out of, South China, if you build it in Mexico, it's 4x the cost. And if you build it in the United States, it's 5x the cost. So, the 25% or higher tariff on that 1x cost in China still sort of disappears or almost goes away compared to building the product closer to home. So you have to be very tactical about it and really model all of your costs.
Yeah.
Do you guys get a lot of requests to basically dual source or look at different locations, Jack?
We're having this conversation 3 or 4 times a day, either with our existing legacy clients or with new potential clients. And our standard process is when we're looking into manufacturing a new design, a new product for a client, we provide 3 quotes. So, those 3 quotes used to emerge principally from China, or more, we say Greater China, including Taiwan and other places. Now we're offering a quote, from some other more distant geography, most often Southeast Asia, but more and more we're modeling costs in Mexico as well.
And then is that something where like your client then makes a strategic decision based on all kinds of parameters, but the location really is just one of them, right?
Correct. And what we say is, you know what, you need to be an internationalist. It's you can't just reflexively say I'm going to transfer all production to Costa Rica, sort of in a bubble or a vacuum. You have to consider all of the factors that we've been discussing this afternoon.
Mhm.
From a dual source standpoint, if you're a big company like Dell, you often go out for bid and then you pick two, and then they're kind of um, they're kind of dynamically shifting, a 60-40 mix between the two. But most of our customers are not at that scale. And so I would say it makes more sense to um, partner deeply, do a lot of research, pick a partner deeply, and make and optimize for that single solution. Um, always have your head up and make sure that that continues to be the right solution. But as a startup without scale, or not even as a startup, as a mid-tier or mid-volume company, um, dual sourcing will likely cost you a lot. There could be critical components that you have a plan B for, but I would say to manage two different suppliers for one solution would probably hurt your business more than it would help you. Um, and then back to the comment I made about knowing your total cost. Um, I've seen a lot of people obsess over, like I said before, a price for a piece of plastic, but then they blow several dollars on how the product gets from point A to B. And then they're blowing several more dollars when it's sitting in a warehouse. And then they blow another dollar when it's picked and placed into shipping. And so the, you know, getting the right efficiencies and cost from your contract manufacturing is important, but there are significant costs downstream from that you could actually save a lot more money in the total cost of that product ending up in a customer's hands that need equal attention. So,
Makes sense.
and I'd say another, the dual sourcing thing, the other mistake, I call it a mistake, but at the time, you know, you rationalize it, and that is, let's just bring those two parts back to the States and then we'll do something with them here. Or, let's bring that part back and then we'll flash some firmware here, throw a cable in here. When those 10 pallets of goods arrive at the warehouse and you have to open every box and throw in a cable and throw in a instruction manual, you just blew a couple dollars or more per product by touching
Mhm.
that solution. So where at all possible, don't touch it.
Wow.
Sure, it's coming, from, like, if you're buying it or, making it FES, take the time to make sure you never have to touch it. It goes straight to the consumer, or you're gonna you're gonna burn a lot of that hard-earned savings and efficiency just by adding a cable in your warehouse. And then you might introduce other risks to to the bomb. So another.
We strongly second that, Scott. We encourage our clients to get as close as they can to retail ready at the contract manufacturer's location. There are some exceptions where they really do have to do the final configuration closer to home, but in most cases that can be handed off to a competent CM.
Mhm. So, Jack, I have a question. I have a follow-up question on that, actually. Can you guys hear me? I think my internet is a little shady. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. For really high-tech products, and I'm talking, things that are beyond like the complexity of, let's say, a regular PCB assembly. Um, how hard is it really to do that? Like, how hard is it to make that, basically, because there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of firmware flashing, there's a lot of, I would say, final like calibration that has to happen, right? How do you manage something like a microscope or that has a lot of like optical, components, or spectros, kind of that end assembly, that you feel like you advise, or do you is it
Gregor, I lost about a third of what you
that you have
said. It got
the
a little choppy, but I think I can interpret your question. Um, and to summarize, there may be a lot of complex testing associated with a product. And what we often do is we will generate the test fixtures and the testing protocol close to home, here in the United States, in Western Europe, wherever the client may be, and then transfer that over to the CM in whatever locale that they are. Um, that's a fairly heavy lift sometimes because, again, you have to make sure that the test method and also the fixtures associated with it are going to play well in more than one location. And it's hard to do, but it's worth the investment. Time and effort in order to do that. Did I capture kind of the key part of your question? No. Okay.
Yeah, no, that was great. I think that's what we face a lot of times, really high tech products. I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah, and I would add to that, that oftentimes we're all under the gun schedule wise. And it's usually at the expense of a cycle of prototyping and testing and validation. And so, the supplier can't always push back, doesn't have the luxury of pushing back. So if Loft Design is working with the client and the client saying, we don't need, that second round or third round of prototyping and testing, um, those that shortcut of time quite frequently ends up taking longer later. And that could be at the expense of modifying a tool. It could be at the expense of laying the board out again, or some human factors discovery that you're going, wow, we should have added this feature. So we all live in the same, got to have it tomorrow, got to have it at the lowest cost and all these things. But to your point of how do you do a complex product, usually keeping a disciplined cycle of prototyping and testing before production is the first step to be careful. And then to what Jack said about creating fixtures and test protocols, we've had the situation where we've created testing fixtures and they weren't exactly the same as the one that the engineer back in the States was using. So we were, having inconsistent data. So one of the ways we've ended up fixing that is we'll build two fixtures, send one back to the US so that we know we're measuring apples to apples. So
Scott, when you go through those steps of the multiple steps of generating prototypes, are you generating those overseas in Asia?
what we prefer to do is actually have FES do them. So even if we rely on an outside prototype house, what it does is it gets our mechanical engineers more familiar with,
Mhm.
talking then to our manufacturing engineering to say, we should redesign this because this is going to be a problem doing cable routing, or, this is just going to take more time. And so the more we're involved with that prototyping process, the better it tends to be down the road with discovery and optimizing the design for manufacturing or testing or whatnot. So where possible, but it, it it's all over the map with every customer has a different process essentially. So sometimes they're creating the prototypes and telling us what they're finding, but we would we prefer and we find it to have a better outcome if we're doing that and then kind of sharing what we're finding back. Because in the end, we're going to be responsible for delivering a product that looks good and functions properly.
We have had this experience many times where it makes sense to prototype a board or other parts, other components here at home in the United States. And there's still a great, set of quick turn and prototype printed circuit board fabricators here. So if we need four, they're great. If we need 40 pieces, they're still great. But it kind of runs out of gas if you need 400 pieces. And many times a client will kind of encourage us, well, just scale this at home, right? They know how to do it. They've been building, the first set of prototypes. And we've seen again and again, it doesn't scale well. So kind of generating prototypes close to where the product will eventually be built in volume is a sound strategy for us. And I would imagine for you as well.
Yeah, we can build short turn, and that also tends to highlight some issues. It might highlight supply chain issues or some kind of board layout, but we work either way. But I think part of this discussion is another thing that I've found is that sometimes an OEM customer has successfully been building a product in-house and they decide to offshore for whatever reason. And the effort it takes to communicate the build, and they've been doing this for years internally, they know how to do it. And then they decide to offshore it. They work with an FES or an Eastbridge, but they don't take the same amount of time and care in communication. And I would say that there's a different way to communicate with somebody like an FES, and it takes effort. It's not an RFQ via email, and then you get the price back. If you like the price, you say, okay, let's go. It takes a lot of work, and
Mhm.
whether or not it takes somebody to fly over and visit in the factory, that's kind of a situation by situation. Some things don't need somebody to fly over. Some things will be okay to send samples back and you look at them and you approve the
Mhm.
first article. And this is where Eastbridge plays a huge role for customers and actually being the interface that's going back and forth potentially. But the point being is it takes effort. And we've worked with some OEMs that just they know how to communicate internally, but they don't know how to communicate with an outside supplier. So that's another kind of ingredient to success that sometimes is not appreciated. So
I agree with you. I think, a couple projects, right? They just say, use this SKU. We're just going to add some functionality and make it cheaper. And in the end, it was actually pretty challenging to find a supply chain that was able to do whatever they did before, right? So it's really critical to have that communication ongoingly to be successful.
Yeah, and the process that you're both describing, it takes an enormous amount of time. That iterative process, building prototypes, shipping them, testing them, getting the feedback, and so forth. And I can tell you that time and again, when we're looking at a project at the earliest stages, there are sort of three key questions that we have to address. And the first is it technically feasible as it's designed? The second one is, how much will it cost? And the third is, how long will it take? And I can tell you the one that we're challenged on most vigorously is the how long it will take. And clients and people advising them, they just kind of refuse to believe us that it couldn't possibly take that long. But time and again it does. So um, it requires a lot of coaching and advising early in the process to kind of allow clients to understand what the manufacturing pathway really represents time-wise.
I agree. I think also, especially if you're moving supply chains into a new country or a new factory, building these extra prototypes in, I think you guys talked about that, is really critical. Understanding that you need more time for regulatory compliance, for, final assemble testing, for, basically doing all the checks and balances, even more than when you have an OEM that you've worked with for years. If you're moving it to a new location, it's really like we advise our clients usually say it takes about 30% more time and at least to kind of qualify with a new, if you have never worked with that site or if you never worked with that OEM before.
Yeah, and that kind of dovetails another lesson learned for me over the years is that um, a lot of times the desire to offshore is to find a low cost supplier and get the best cost and bring it back and you're done. And I would call that a transactional engagement. And maybe you need 10 USB cables, 1,000 USB cables. Transactional is great. But when you're building a complex product, um, the mindset should be a partnership versus transactional relationship. And, do the homework, investigate various suppliers who can meet the basics of what you're trying to do, but then invest in that relationship and develop a partnership because um, if you beat that supplier up to where they're not making the margins that they need to make to sustain their business, it's not a long-term relationship. And if you invest in that partnership, I guarantee you, when you have issues and when you're building hardware, 99% of the time there are going to be issues. Um, that supplier, if you've developed that partnership, is going to go way out of their way to help you resolve those issues. So take a long-term mindset, take a partnering relationship mindset, and I think that will serve you very well in the growth of your business.
I think especially if you're a startup, right? If you're starting your journey, having a tight relationship with a competent OEM or a partner like Eastbridge or FBS can really be a game changer, right? As you're scaling, because you have a lot of needs that you can't fill inside, testing or even part sourcing. That if you have the right partner, they can make that a lot easier. Than you would trying to find something on a secondary market or even a lot of times, as Jack said, there is pack-ins, right? There's packaging, there is bags, there is cables, other things that your OEM or your partner that is building your product can really help you also source these and very effective. Yes.
Yeah, if you find the right partner, you can you can stay lean and you can stay focused on, what is your core competency, and that is knowing the technology, the solution that you're building a product around, and the customers and the channels. So you're doing the marketing, you're doing the design, you're you're iterating and creating the next version and killer features for your next product. If you find the right partner, you can scale with them, and you don't need, bigger company will have a buyer and a procurement person and a sourcing person and so on and so forth. You don't need all that if you have the right partner, and there are these tools and processes and good communication where you're like, well, I can do this with an hour worth of work. I don't need to buy that. I don't need to hire that person and spend the money on that internally. I can lean on the supplier to do that for me. So it can be a real competitive advantage if you have the right partner. And then you get to scale and you don't need to change. So finding the partner who can start with you small and help you through the startup mode, but can also sustain when you scale and grow large. You don't need to start new with somebody else. That can be a real competitive advantage as well.
I can see that Gregor's internet finally got the best of him.
Oh,
So, but I want to give the audience perhaps the opportunity to ask questions. If they have questions in the chat, let me know. And otherwise, I think it's been a fascinating and very timely conversation. While Gregor rejoins, perhaps Scott and both Scott and
I'm
Jack. Oh,
back.
you're back. How do you see the year? Like, what's your kind of strategic approach for the year?
Jack, you want to go?
sure. We wrote a lot of proposals last year, and there was a lot of interest, but there seemed to be some challenges, getting clients to sign off and move forward. I think there was a lot of uncertainty based on, what's happening on the geopolitical front. And we are clearly not political scientists or economists, we're engineers. But it seems that this year our clients are kind of ready to move. There was this latency last year. They were nervous, and it's gotten to the point where people are kind of moving forward. So we see 2025 being a good year for Eastbridge and for our clients. Again, as I said earlier, we're having these conversations 3 or 4 times a day about the how and the where to facilitate, navigating changes in tariffs and duties. Um, I think that even with that, um, we're all going to have a continued reliance on China through this process. And you can't just snap your fingers and move these products easily and seamlessly. Um, it has to be done strategically, and seeing what FES has done, and it's a good model for how to address this moving forward. But Scott, I would very much like to hear your thoughts also.
Well, I think despite the domestic change of administration, on a global footprint, there's been a long-term decoupling of China, where there was this over reliance on China for the past, let's say, 15 years. And so for the past 8 years or so, supply chains have been decoupling. And we see that at large companies like Dell and Logitech and GoPro, as I mentioned. So that's going to continue, even though there's this additional kind of more urgent or unknown with the new administration. The way we've seen it, and Jack mentioned this, is that even if there was a new tariff levied on every single import, Canada, Mexico, all over Asia, the fundamental question of what is your total cost? Is it going to be cheaper to make it in the U.S. or not? I don't think those economics are going to change. So I think to produce quality products at the price point that people are going to want to pay for them, you're still going to be dealing with that same that same ecosystem. What we see for this year, we're actually building a brand new 4-story factory. So we're quadrupling down on our Thailand footprint because of that decoupling that we've seen and continues to happen. And this is in Thailand. And we see more of the same from last year, where people are transitioning out of China. So we'll be helping. We were helping last year, and we'll continue to help this year. A lot of clients getting out of China, and then a lot of startups as they evaluate where they want to plant their flag. We're really excited. We probably have about 6 startups that are in the process of maybe they're at a engineering validation phase. So they're right before kicking off tooling and then getting to ramp and getting their product to market. So it's a really exciting year for us. And I think there was a lot of pent up post-COVID kind of startups doing products, and they were working really hard last year to get them to market. So 2025, I think, for a lot of clients that were delayed, they're going to finally get their product to market. And that's our personal or FES's clients, we're seeing that. But I think that's a broader trend, as we're going to see a lot of cool stuff coming out of design consulting firms and their clients hitting the market in 2025. So it's really exciting.
Well, let's hope. That sounds exciting. Well, thanks everybody for calling in. Sorry, I got kicked out of the meeting for a minute here. So, but keep in touch. Yeah, if you have any needs in the space, I think Jack, with Eastbridge, FES International, and of course Loft, will always like to help. And I think there was some questions answered in the chat. Jim was asking about Chris was asking about reverse engineering, and I think Jack jumped in. There's, I think, many resources that people can leverage to kind of help with the supply chain. And thanks for joining today. And let's keep in touch and have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.